Hi book friends, welcome back to Books and Tea Time, or welcome if this is your first time here. I'm Addie, and today we are doing my winter wrap-up. So, I don't do monthly TBR and wrap-up videos because I just can't really keep up with them. I never really stick to a strict TBR. I have like a TBR stack that I'll change out every couple of months. But you guys really seem to like when I do wrap-up videos, so I tend to do them seasonally. And today we're going to talk about all the books that I read from December, like mid-December, to March, like the very end of March. And that amounts to, I've got my notes here, 28 books and 2 DNFs. I've got 3 double-sided pages worth of notes here to talk about, and to get us through it, I poured myself a glass of wine. So sit back and enjoy a beverage. If you're over 21, grab an adult beverage if that's your jam. And we're going to get right into it because it's going to take ages. So first, we have all the books that I read from like mid-December till the end of December. And the first book on this list is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. We are starting off super duper strong. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I have very, very few complaints. There are a few nitpicky things that I have to complain about with this book, but overall, it was a stunning and amazing first installment to a new fantasy series. This is fantasy, if you were wondering. I also did an entire reading vlog dedicated to this where I tried to read this in 24 hours, so I'll have a link to that vlog if you're interested in watching me try and binge read this book. This is a really, really awesome, epic fantasy story. It's multi-POV. We follow 4 different perspectives, and it's all converging towards this one big event that's supposed to happen, so we're like counting down the days till this big event happens and why that event is so important and kind of is going to shift power dynamics between different groups of people in this world. Some really awesome things about it. You've got awesome representation, varied use of pronouns, which I really, really love. I would definitely say that my absolute favorite character is the Shala, I think that's how you say it. She is definitely my favorite. She's just got like this really kick-ass attitude. Like the very first scene where we meet her, she's in prison, and her character is just so funny but also heartwarming, and I can't wait to get more about her backstory and the place that she comes from in the next book, although I don't even know when the next book's coming out because this one was just published, I think, in December or November of 2020, so it's gonna be a while, but I definitely look forward to rereading this before the second one releases, and taking it a little bit slower, maybe annotating it a bit, because as I said, I tried to read this in 24 hours. I highly recommend this if you are into fantasy, if you like multi-POV fantasy, if you like the convergence or like a countdown kind of a thing. I really don't know how to describe this, but like everything starting at different places and everything coming together. Does that make sense? There's also a lot of really good like political intrigue and like political tensions, I guess you could say, explored in this. Yeah, so 4.5 out of 5 stars, definitely really love this, and go check out the vlog if you want to hear more. These next 5 books I read in December as part of the Disney Channel Games Readathon, which was hosted by a bunch of wonderful creators on the platform. I'll have both of my vlogs linked in a card and down below, along with my TBR video if you're interested, so you can see that, but yeah, so the Disney Channel Games Readathon took place over 2 weeks, and I read 5 books for each of the 5 challenges. The very first book that I read for the DCG Readathon was In Order to Live, A North Korean Girl's Journey to Freedom by Yeonmi Park, and I half read this, half listened to the audiobook while I was reading it, because I've just been really into that lately, is like reading while someone reads to you. It's just been very relaxing and helping me stay focused, so I've been doing that a lot. There's awesome pictures in this. I actually found this book in a little library. I also just love when books have pictures, or like when memoirs have pictures. So this book follows the childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood of Yeonmi Park, who was born in North Korea, and her family sort of realizing how the North Korean government was manipulating, really brainwashing its people, their escape to China, and then eventually to South Korea. I would definitely look up the content warnings for this if you're interested in reading it, just so that you're prepared, because it is a very, very sad and difficult text to read. I just feel like I really learned a lot of things from reading her perspective. It's really important to read memoirs and narratives and fiction from authors outside of America or outside of the Western view of what it is to be a human being, because there were so many wonderful insights that I had never thought of. I'm just gonna share with you guys a quick example of what I'm talking about. If you grow up in the West, you may think that romance occurs naturally, but it does not. You learn how to be romantic from books and movies or from observation, but there was no model to learn from in my parents' time. They didn't have the language to talk about their feelings. You just had to guess how your beloved felt from the look in his eyes or the tone of her voice when she spoke to you. The most they could do was hold hands secretly. This just revealed a lot about like the politics of personhood and coming into yourself and understanding yourself. It was moving. There were points where I wanted to cry. There were points where I just really wanted to reach out and give her a hug. And I'm really glad that I read it and that I found it in a little library, so yeah. After that, I dabbled into a graphic novel and I read the first volume of Saga by Brian K. Vaughn. Oh my god, I forgot to tell you, I gave In Order to Live 5 out of 5 stars. And I also gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, which is why I thought of that. This is a really cool graphic novel. It's definitely very gory and graphic, if you know what I mean. It's a great setup to a new series. I'm really interested in all the characters and their potential arcs, their evolution, but basically you follow the perspective of this baby who was born kind of like Romeo and Juliet style to parents from different planets that are at war with each other, and now that they're like on the run because they had a baby together, they have to protect their child, but it's from their child's perspective, kind of. And you just meet all these other characters, like this bounty hunter dude, and the art is gorgeous, the color, the design. I really like it. Can't wait to read the next installment. I see a lot of potential. If you like graphic novels, if you like horror, mixed sci-fi stuff, space things like Star Wars, etc., I think you would really like it. And I look forward to reading the other ones, as I said. It's funny, it's gross, I dig it, I don't know. Next, I read At Bertram's Hotel. This is garbage. I have already ranted about this book, I think in like 3 or 4 other videos. I'm just going to direct you to my best and worst books of 2020 video if you're interested. Obviously, this falls in the worst category of that. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's my least favorite Agatha Christie that I have ever read. It's really disappointing. I do not recommend it. It is a waste of time. It's a waste of your time. Don't do it. I gave it a 2 stars. After that, after I was so miserably disappointed by this, I decided to try Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie because I was really in the mood for a good, juicy mystery, and I really like Agatha Christie, and At Bertram's Hotel was not what I was looking for, so I went to the used bookstore. I picked this up and a couple other Agatha Christie's that I haven't read yet, and this one was pretty good. It's definitely on the longer side. It is about like this starlet like lady. I don't really even remember what this is about, which goes to show that it wasn't that great. This was like a medium level. I still think Murder on the Orient Express and Then There Were None are like top tier Agatha Christie mysteries. So good. This was like middle of the road, you know? Not super memorable. I remember that the twist caught me off guard, but basically this really, really famous rich starlet who I think is from America, I don't even remember, she dies on this cruise on the Nile, and Hercule Poirot, I never know how to say his name, just happens to be there. I think he's like on vacation or something, and he just happens to be there and is supposed to solve this mystery. And so yeah, I didn't see the twist coming. I wasn't really 100% sure who the killer was. So it was enjoyable. but it's not her best. If you're starting out with Agatha Christie, go for Murder on the Orient Express or And Then There Were None first. If you're a really die-hard Christie or a die-hard mystery fan, I think it's worth your time. I just wouldn't start with this if you're new to Agatha Christie because it's not her best work. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have my first audiobook of the bunch, and that is In a Hollidaze, I love saying that title, by Christina Lauren. I forgot that I have wine, so we're gonna sip this. I'm gonna hold this while I talk about this book so that I have something in my hands. So yeah, this was a decent romance. Again, I'm not a romance booktuber, despite the fact that I think there are like 5 or 6 romance books on this wrap-up. I didn't start reading romance until like last fall in 2020. So don't come to me for a really detailed and expert romance book recommendation. I am your gal for fantasy, for literary / historical fiction, classics, that kind of a thing. I'm not really your romance gal. So when I tell you that this was okay, just take that with a grain of salt. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was a cute idea. It's like kind of a Groundhog Day thing where this girl is going to celebrate Christmas with her family and all their family friends. It's kind of like found family plus real family, like where you like call people your uncle but you're not really related to them, you know what I mean? And they have to sell this cabin and she's really sad about it. So she just keeps going back and reliving this day, trying to make it perfect, kind of, or like just enjoy it. It's really weird. The thing that I don't love about this is that the Groundhog Day thing falls off after like halfway through and it's like not relevant anymore. I've never seen the movie Groundhog Day, so I don't know if that's normal, if that's how it's supposed to happen, but it was just like a little, like the first half of the book was one book and then the second half of the book was a different book but with similar characters. I don't know. I wasn't crazy about the 2 love interests. I mean, they were cute together, but it wasn't like, you know, give you butterflies, like steamy, excited, cute romance that I typically look for in any story that I read where there's romance between the 2 characters. It was kind of steamy. I would give it like a 4 out of 10 fire emojis. If you really like mild smut, if you like romance, if you like friends to lovers, and if you like family being a big part of it, or if you like holiday things, like if you like Hallmark movies, Hallmark Christmas movies, read this book. But if you don't, maybe skip it. That's all I'll say on that one. Okay, now we're into January 2021, and probably the biggest disappointment that I have read thus far, which makes me really mad because it's this long. Just imagine reading a book that is over 800 pages and coming out of it and all you have to say is meh. It was okay. Like, oh my god. Horrifying. Like, oh my. Anyway, that book is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I will admit, I was 100% duped by this cover. It got me, you know? Don't judge a book by its cover. I learned my lesson, okay? Because this looks amazing. And I was committed. You know, this is a long book. And I mean, I read a lot of thick fantasy, but this is sci-fi. And I like sci-fi, but I don't read a lot of it. I'm getting back into the sci-fi space, and I decided to read this as part of that sci-fi journey. And oh boy, was it a mistake, because it is so boring and... Okay, here's the thing. I didn't really like the main character that much. She was like, okay, but she was also kind of annoying. Obviously, it is way too long. It could have been at least 200 pages shorter, and then maybe, I wouldn't have been so critical of it, but to have a book that's this long and have it still leave you, like, confused or wanting more, wanting something different. I'm like, 800 pages and that's all you could give me, dude? Like, are you serious? There's a romance that's kind of doesn't even need to be there. I feel like it's kind of forced because, like, it's a sci-fi and it's 800 pages long, and if it doesn't have a romance, like, what? I don't know. It's kind of forced and then completely tossed under the rug after that. It's repetitive. It's too long, like I said. And the ending is just... The ending makes me feel like this is going to be a series, but I know that it's not, and it should not be under any circumstances. But the ending is unsatisfying, and weird. Oh god, I just don't even know what to say other than I disliked it. And I know that there are probably going to be people who like this. If you really like Christopher Paolini, if you really like sci-fi, this is the guy who wrote the Aragon books, if you're familiar. I've never read them, but this was like his first book in like 10 years or something, and I mean, it's not horrible, but it's just not worth your time for 800 pages. The aliens were cool. That's really the only redeeming factor. There's a couple different like factions of aliens. Like the science fiction parts of it were interesting, but the characters, the plot, the pacing, the length, the ending, all of that kind of weighed against it, if that makes sense. So I don't recommend it, but if you want to torture yourself, I can't stop you. So okay, after I read that, I read the shortest book I think I've ever read. I went from 800 pages to like, what, 60 pages? 50 pages. And I read We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is an essay adapted from her TED Talk on the same topic with, I believe, the same title. I read this, I think, on International Women's Day just because I was like, in the mood, you know, for just like something feminist, some feminist literature that I was reading. I read this, and then I read some of Hood Feminism, which I'm still in the middle of reading, by Mickey Kendall, and I think this was pretty good. I gave it a 3 out of, did I tell you my rating for Christopher Paolini? I didn't. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, which frankly is way too generous. It should probably be more like a 2, but you know, I don't know. Anyway, I also gave this a 3 stars, but for different reasons. It's a decent essay. I mean, it's short. I'm not expecting, like, a bunch out of 50 pages. Like, I feel like it did what it needed to do. I'm interested. I think I can maybe go watch the TED Talk and see if that makes me feel a little different. It's hyper-focused on feminism, I think, from her perspective as a Nigerian woman, which is cool, but to me, it just didn't say anything that wasn't already kind of obvious. Does that make sense? I don't know. Tiana T, from Tiana T, the booktube channel, had a similar experience while she was reading, but her review is a lot more articulate than mine is happening to be right now, so I would definitely go check out her review. I'm going to try and find the video where she reviewed it down below. I think she read it in one of her, like, Goodreads challenge vlog things, so I'll have that link down below if you're interested. But, I mean, if you have some time, I think this is a really cool, quick read. I mean, I annotated it. There's some interesting insights. But for the most part, I mean, it's not just like, wow, revolutionary, big feminist manifesto kind of a thing. It's more like the framework, the foundation for moving forward. If you're looking for a quick read, a refresh, a starting point in feminist criticism, at its intersection with race. I enjoyed it. I'm glad that I read it, and I love Adiche and her fiction, so I want to read more of her fiction this year. Okay, next up, I read more fantasy because it's my happy place, and I read the 3rd book in the Rhaenyra Chronicles by Michael J. Sullivan, and that is The Death of Dulgath. I feel like a broken record talking about these books on my channel. The Rhaenyra Revelations is a trilogy. It is one of my favorite series of all time. These books are the prequel books to that trilogy. It's awesome, great fantasy series. Absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best ever. 10 out of 10. If you haven't read it, you should check it out. I'll have information about it down below if you want to know. I'm hyperactive right now. I don't know why. I need more wine. Yeah. This is the 3rd book in the prequel series. And I think it's my favorite so far. It's really, really well done. It's like a fantasy mixed with a little bit of mystery, which I kind of really liked. Hadrian and Royce go to this like kind of island, not really island, but like a far place on the coast of one of the areas in the fantasy world that they're from, and they are hired to tell this woman how they would kill her if they were hired to kill her, because she thinks someone else is trying to kill her and she wants to know how to protect herself. So it's kind of a mystery in the sense that you're trying to figure out who wants to kill her this whole time, and they're investigating this community, and like there's a mysterious magic vibe to this village, and it's really, really cool. I loved it. I thought it was so funny as always and intriguing, and I genuinely didn't know what was going to happen. And you also get a little bit of backstory into Royce a little bit more in this. and his relationship with himself and his identity. Again, I'm being purposefully vague so that I don't spoil anything, but really loved it. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. If you like fantasy, if you like a little bit of mystery, if you like Ireland, I think that the way that this place is described and kind of how it is in this picture, it reminds me of like Ireland and like the Cliffs of Moher kind of thing. If you like that, I think you would really like this. If you just like Sullivan's other works, if you like the Ryria Revelations, these books are amazing. If you like Lethal Weapon, the movie, the main characters are basically Riggs and Murtaugh, but in a fantasy world, which is like 1,000 times cooler. I just love it. Next, we're getting into some of the books that I read for school. They're going to be sprinkled throughout the rest of this because this is the first book that I read for the spring semester, and that is The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. I read this for one of my classes on postmodern literature. This is the first book that we read. It was really good, surprisingly. I was expecting to hate all the books that I read for this class, and I actually found some really good books that I read in this class. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. It is about this woman whose former lover passes away, but he names her like the executor of his will, so she has to travel to this place in California. She has to figure out and like handle all of the stuff with his will, but then she gets sucked into like this conspiracy that like might not even be a conspiracy. It's just like super weird, whimsy, and creepy. It takes place in I think like the 60s. The only thing I will say is if you do not like ambiguous endings where like two things or like a myriad of things are possible and the author doesn't tell you what the answer is, I wouldn't read this because like it has one of those endings, and if it'll just frustrate you, I wouldn't waste your time on it. But if you are okay with that or intrigued by that, I definitely think this would be a great story for you. So if you like trippy conspiracy stuff and if you're okay with no resolution, I would check it out. I think it's pretty good, and I've heard good things about Pynchon, and I know that this is one of his shorter works, so if you want to start with Pynchon, this might be a good place to start, but I haven't read any of his other stuff, so I can't really say one way or the other. Next, I read Miram's Kitchen by Elizabeth Erlich for my class on gender, politics, and food, which is a really, really wonderful course that I'm taking this semester. I'm almost done with all these classes, so it's kind of sad to talk about. But this is a memoir all about Erlich's personal experience with food, gender, and spirituality. How her relationship with her Jewish faith and Jewish food traditions ebbs and flows and evolves over time as her personal identity and her life changes, and as she interacts with her mother-in-law, whose name is Miram, which is why it's called Miram's Kitchen. And I absolutely loved this memoir. I thought it was stunning, and it's really valuable to me as someone who grew up Catholic to get to understand the nuances of what it means to be a Jewish American and how varied Jewish American identity can be, and that Jewish people are not a monolith and Jewish Americans are not a monolith, and understanding the different characters and all of their, or characters, I mean they're real people, but the people that you're reading about, all their individual relationships. Also, one really cool thing about this is that interspersed between like the memoir writing moments, I'm trying to find one, there are recipes. So you'll have a recipe and then you'll have a couple pages of like a memory, and it's also organized according to time period, and it takes you throughout an entire year of time. It was moving, it was inspirational, it was funny, it was heartbreaking. It gave me all the feels. It gave me so many rich insights. It gave me some recipes that I want to try, and I really loved it. If you like books about food, gender, spirituality, and all of those things intersecting, if you like theory and writing about that, if you like food lit, and if you want to learn about Jewish food tradition, especially if you are not a Jewish person, I think that that is really wonderful because it allows me to be more sensitive to people in my life who are Jewish, who practice a kosher living style, because I didn't know much about that before reading this, and I feel like I am more prepared to be sensitive to their personal tradition. Then I reread for the third time The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. Now, I know you're thinking, why won't you stop reading this book? And this time it was because I had to read it for a class. So I read this for a seminar that I'm taking on post-humanism and post-human theory, and oh, it was so good. This is actually my second copy because my first copy is absolutely falling apart. You all know I love this series. I'm writing my thesis about it. It's near and dear to my heart. I loved it just as much the third time around as I did all the other times. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I keep forgetting to tell you this. I gave Miriam's Kitchen a 5 out of 5 stars too. I'm a mess. So I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. It was a reread. I read it for my post-humanism class. Also, I started this new annotation practice of doing different color highlights for different themes, and I've been really loving it, and it's fun to flip through at the end and see all the different colors. So, yeah. 5 out of 5 stars. If you like fantasy, multiple worlds, moral, spiritual, revolution, ideology, and if you love animals, or the idea of spirit animals, you would definitely like this series. Although, I genuinely believe everybody should read this series. It's amazing. Love it. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. We're now into February 2021. And the first book that I read in February is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I listened to this on an audiobook, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm going to tell you that now, so hopefully I don't forget. This is also one of the first books that I read for Blackathon, which is a readathon hosted by Jessie from Bowties and Books. I'll have my TBR video and my 2 vlogs linked and in cards if you're interested in watching them, because I do give a lot more of a detailed review of the books that I read for that in those vlogs. What I will say about Grown is that I really liked it. I thought it was really well written, but it is a very sad and heavy book. It's difficult to read because it is just so, like, rife with pain and sadness. I mean, it is about a young teenage girl who is taken advantage of and like mentored or groomed by this older man who is very, very rich and popular and influential in the music industry. And he notices her at this like concert kind of showcase thing and starts to take advantage of her and abuse her. And it's about her struggle to break free from him and to protect herself and her family after encountering this predator. So for that reason, it is a very, very, very heavy book to read. What I love is that Jackson includes the content warnings at the beginning of the book, and I've heard so many people praise her for that, and I absolutely agree that we need to normalize doing that and have it as an expectation for all writers to include those trigger warnings, content warnings at the beginning of books, because it's so important, you know, to be able to prepare yourself for what you're about to read so that you aren't putting yourself in a position where you are uncomfortable or where you are putting your own mental health or your own comfortability at stake, because ultimately reading is meant to be enjoyable, and if you don't have those content warnings, reading can potentially be detrimental. So I absolutely agree with everyone saying and praising Jackson for including the content warnings at the beginning. It's so wonderful, so great to see. This is a YA thriller / mystery. There are some plot points and inconsistencies, especially toward the end, that were a little like off-putting and like threw me off a little bit, but overall it was a really, really moving and wonderful story, and I think just so important and relevant. I believe that she wrote it during the height of like the Me Too movement. Difficult read, but nonetheless very, very powerful and important, and I look forward to reading more of Jackson's work in the future because this is the first book that I've ever read from Tiffany D. Jackson. So yeah. Next, we're gonna go over this really fast. I read Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs for my postmodernism class. This book is wild. It is absolutely wild. It is really, really weird, really, really graphic, incredibly difficult at points to read. Basically, it is about a man who is addicted to heroin and his, like, experiences in New York while he's addicted to heroin. It's really, really hard to describe. It's just a weird book. I do not recommend it unless you love postmodernism or you really love William Burroughs. It's graphic, it's violent, it's wild, it's confusing, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Because, I mean, I understand what it's trying to do, and I understand why it's important to postmodernism as a movement, as an aesthetic, but it's just not for me. At all. No. Next, I read another amazing book. This is also a book that I read for Blackathon, also a book that I have an in-depth review for in a vlog, and that is The Lesson by Cadwell Turnbull. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I have seen some other people complaining or like having a lot of like nitpicky things with this book, but for me, I loved this book. I read it very quickly. I can't wait to reread it and annotate it, but I was just sucked in and I wanted to know because it's so suspenseful. It's amazing. This is a sci-fi, but I definitely would say that it has thriller qualities as well. It's about an alien race that comes to like benevolently comes to Earth, and in exchange for temporary like safe haven, they are going to give human beings like advanced technology. There is also a lot of tension between the aliens and the people of the Virgin Islands because the ship that the aliens came in kind of like hovers above the Virgin Islands, and a lot of like the concentration of the aliens are in the Virgin Islands, and they are very easily provoked into violent action. Like they say that they are benevolent, but if they are threatened in any way, they will attack to the point of murdering people because they're from a very hostile planet, and they use that as their excuse for being incredibly violent and murderous. What I will say is that this is a very character-driven story in the absolute best way. And one of the complaints that I've heard is that the author doesn't dive enough into the alien race and like their history, their technology, their powers of like shape-shifting, because they look like people, like they present as human, even though like you can kind of tell based on a couple quirks like who is one of these Yana alien people and who is actually human. But I think that Cadwell Turnbull does a wonderful job of using the Ina people and the alien race to comment on humanity. To me, the character work and the commentary on politics and race and post-colonial world and the effect of colonialism on the post-colonial world, etc. I think all of that just absolutely makes up for the fact that we don't get a deep dive into the Ina and their powers and their abilities. If you like sci-fi, if you like thriller, if you like character-driven stories, if you like the movie Arrival, I think you'd really like this. And if you just like aliens coming to Earth, that kind of sci-fi trope, you definitely really love this. It's really beautiful, and if you want even more detailed information, go ahead and watch my vlog where I review this book. Next we have another incredible book. Okay, this is also a book that I read for Blackathon, and it is also a 5 out of 5 stars, and that is Conjure Woman by Afia Atakora. Oh my god, this might be one of my favorite books of the year. I know it's early to say, but wow! This book is good. Read it. This is a literary fiction, but also kind of a historical fiction, also kind of like a little bit magical realism story that follows 3 women, and it also jumps in time between before, during, and after the Civil War in America, in the South specifically. And you follow a mother and daughter who are enslaved on a plantation. Mother is Miss May Bell. She is a conjure woman. She practices the occult. She's raising and educating her daughter Rue in the conjuration occult practices so that she can take her mother's place and work alongside of her mother when she becomes older. And the third woman, who I mentioned, Verena, is the same age as Rue, and they kind of grow up, and their fates are sort of intertwined together. And then in the present, Rue is the conjure woman for a community of formerly enslaved African people who have post-Civil War settled in like the outskirts of the plantation where they were enslaved and created their own community there. All of the babies in that community at the beginning of this novel are suddenly taking sick, and there is a lot of conversations about Christianity at tension with conjuration and occultism, because there is a preacher who comes and people start to blame Rue for these children falling sick, and she has to figure out how to protect herself from those accusations while also protecting her actual secrets and the things that she wants to keep buried in her past. And it's a wonderful novel. The second half, first of all, I really love the pacing of this book, but I will say the first half is a little bit slower, and then you get to the second half, and things just hit the fan so fast. This is a literary masterpiece. The language is so elegant and precise, and there's just this constant theme of nature, flower, conjurative, generative energy in the language of this book. It's just so, so beautiful. Here we go. This is a really great example. This is on page 54 if you have a copy. They say the river swelled up fit to weep for her. It occluded the roads and the old byways. It ruined the roots of the trees. Living water, it swallowed up the old proud stalks of cotton, and still the river rose. And Miss Rue, the only one left to sustain her mamma's curse, found herself afeard of what the river might dredge up. Secret things better left hidden than haunted her. A curse so might rise to the surface, or a curse that might rise to the surface. In that same season of Rue's fear, Black-eyed Bean was born, as though he were the new leaving of an old black tide. I love this book from front to back. It's beautiful. There are twists in the plot. Atakora is amazing. I'm not sure if this is her debut novel, but if it's not, I had to find all of the other things that she's ever written and read them right now. I am in love with her prose and just the way that she weaves stories together. It's excellent. It's beautiful. I love the jumps back and forth in time, the multi-POV, the occult witchy stuff that's going on. Next, we have another book that I read for my postmodern lit class, but one of the books that I have enjoyed most reading for school in a very long time, and that is If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. This is a book about reading and about readers, and if you like books, which I'm assuming you do, you're here for a reason. We're on BookTube. This is our space. This is our happy place. If you like reading, you have to read this book. This is so wonderful, and it really explores what it means to be a reader and to read books and enjoy books and to just dive into a literary space and just want to stay there forever. Like, it is so cool. So it's told in second person, which is really, really interesting, and I know that that might throw you off or like make you question, but it is done so wonderfully. There's like the main story narrative where you're the reader, and then in between each chapter where it's you, the reader, trying to read this book, there are sections, there are excerpts from other books that you keep being interrupted and you can't finish. So like the first one, you open this book, you start reading it, and then you're cut off because you realize the second half of the book is a completely different book. And so then you go to the publisher and you're like, what the heck? And then they give you the right book, and it turns out that this is the beginning of a whole different story. And so you're constantly starting these stories but never finishing them, but it not in an unsatisfying way. It's so unique and interesting. I absolutely adored this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of the best books that I've read for class in a very, very long time that wasn't set during the 19th century. To be honest, I'm not calling myself out or anything. It's cool, it's fresh, it keeps you on your toes, and if you like reading, I think you should read it. I tabbed the hell out of it. It's just so good, and I really think that any reader would find value in this book. Okay, now we've reached the part of the video where you're gonna say, Addie, I thought you told us you weren't a romance booktuber, because the next 2 books that I read are both romance, and that is because in the most beautiful twist of the universe's fate, the universe guided me to the Brown Sisters trilogy. I don't know what it was. For the longest time, I was like, I just don't think these books are for me. I don't read romance. I'm not, like, into that kind of stuff. And then I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown. And I realized that I had no life until I read these books. The Brown Sisters trilogy, I read all 3 of them in the winter months because I just binged the hell out of them. I read the audiobooks, obviously, but I'm definitely going to get my hands on some physical copies because I'm going to be rereading these like clockwork throughout the year. I loved every moment of them. The first one is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. It was hilarious, sweet, cute, funny, steamy, everything that I wanted and more. So this book follows Chloe Brown and Red Morgan, the 2 love interests. Chloe Brown is an introverted kind of individual who suffers from a chronic illness. She has fibromyalgia, and at the very, very beginning of the book, like in the prologue, this is not a spoiler, she has a near-death encounter. She's almost hit by a car, and she decides that she wants to, like, get a life, to spice up her life. So she makes a list of things that she wants to do, and the first one is to move out. And she moves into this building where Red, the other guy, the main character, is the superintendent, and he is kind of like struggling artist, very like broody, handsome-y kind of a guy, and he just had his heart broken. He has some anxiety issues. One of the things that I absolutely love about this book is that it normalizes going to therapy and just makes it okay and really argues a case for therapy as a way to get through your stuff, because I feel like, especially as the fact that it has a male character going to therapy, I just really love the representation of therapy. I thought that that was really, really great. These 2 kind of have an enemies to lovers thing going on, right? And they start to fall for each other, and things get romantic and steamy and delicious, and here's my thing. Because I'm not a romance booktuber, I have a very specific gut reaction that helps me rate and guide how I feel about romances, and that is, if it gives me butterflies and pulls at my heart to the point where I can physically feel it in my chest and my stomach, when they are excited, happy, sad, when there's tension, when they're like feeling those feels for each other, when I can feel that in my own body, it is a good book. In Hollidaze, I didn't really feel that at all. The Hating Game, I absolutely felt that. That was the first adult romance that I've read, and I read that a while back, and I absolutely felt that. And I can say that for all the books in the Brown Sisters trilogy, spoiler alert, I felt those feelings. So I gave all of them a 5 out of 5 stars, because there's just... Talia Hibbert just does such excellent work with presenting diverse romance that just gives you the feels. It's so atmospheric. It's exactly what I was looking for in a romance, and I absolutely loved it. It's also really, really great to see representation for chronic illness in a story, and I learned a lot that I wouldn't have known already about what it's like to live with fibromyalgia and how that affects her daily life, her routine, her experience, and her romantic encounters. If you like romance, if you like steamy romance, this is like a 9 out of 10 on the steam scale, let me just tell you. And if you like enemies to lovers, you definitely like this. Then I read Dani Brown. Guys, you don't even know how much I love Dani Brown. Okay, Take a Hint, Dani Brown is the 2nd book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, and it follows Danica Brown, who is Chloe's younger sister, her middle sister. The 2nd one follows Danica, who is a grad student studying feminism and literature, studying to get a PhD, and that is me. That is exactly my dream. That's what I want to do. I want to go back to grad school, get my PhD. And so I connect with her on another level. And it was so beautiful to read. On top of that, Dani is bisexual. It was so good to get healthy bisexual representation in a story. And then Zafir, and sorry, is her love interest. I am such a dork. Oh my god, he's so sweet. Okay, so he is an ex-rugby player who has experienced a lot of trauma in his life, but he's also an advocate, and he runs this organization that helps young men engage in like athletic sport activity, but he also advocates for their like acknowledgement of their feelings and to get in touch with emotion and to like break down toxic masculine tropes in sports. And so I love him for that reason, because as someone who has generalized anxiety disorder, reading someone who has generalized anxiety disorder, I felt so seen. I just felt really pleased and happy reading Zafir's character, and their romance is, I mean, put those two characters together and it is my dream. My dream couple, dream team. So basically they are friends. He's a security guard at one of the buildings where she is studying and teaching, and they're friends, and then this thing happens where there's a fire drill and he like brings her outside and there's a picture of them and people think that they're dating, and it's really really good for his business because it's getting him interviews and a lot of buzz on social media, so they decide to fake date, and that kind of morphs into a friends with benefits kind of a thing, and then that complicates it and it becomes this whole plot about their potential romance. Yeah, I feel like Talia Hibbert wrote this book personalized to me. If you like romance, again, I think you should check these out. If you like steamy romance, and if you like friends to lovers trope, you would like this book. Next, I reread The Coming Race for a paper that I ended up not even writing. This book is trash, don't read it. This is a late 19th century novel about an advanced race that lives inside the earth. It's just misogynist, white, Eurocentric sci-fi trash. And I don't recommend it. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but that is incredibly generous. Honestly, I don't know what's up with that. I think I gave it a 2 stars actually. I don't know why I wrote 3 here. It honestly doesn't even deserve a rating. It's garbage. Moving on! Next I read Mumbo Jumbo by Ishmael Reed, again for my postmodern lit class. Again, a really, really strong book that I was surprised to like because I was hesitant about postmodernism. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars because it was really interesting. It is kind of part historical fiction, part like alternative history fiction. I don't know if that's making sense. It takes place during the Harlem Renaissance in America, and it is about an anti-plague called Jezgru, which is basically the embodiment of Black creativity and, like, the Harlem Renaissance, like, kind of personified in this, like, anti-plague that, like, infects people and, like, is threatening the Harding administration and the white status quo, basically. So it's really, really interesting. There are a lot of pictures in here, and I don't know if I'm actually, like, showing you any of them by this flip through. But yeah, there are pictures in here, which I thought was really cool, like, actual, like, primary source newspaper clippings that appear every once in a while, and there are a lot of rich insights about tensions in the African diaspora, specifically at this time, because the book is written during the United States' occupation of Haiti. There is a lot of nuanced conversation about Haitian voodoo and its counterpart in America, in Louisiana, which is hoodoo, and we have a main character who practices hoodoo, and kind of his tension with the younger generation and him feeling like the traditions are slipping away and confronting all of those things, and I absolutely loved it. Next, I read The Book of Phoenix by Nnedi Okorafor for my seminar class on posthumanism. Now, here's the thing. This is a prequel to Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. Who Fears Death was written first, obviously, and then this was written as a prequel. And we did not read Who Fears Death, we just read this. I'm not sure why, but all I know is that we read this. I haven't read Who Fears Death, and I think that part of that influenced my experience of this novel. I felt like there were a lot of plot holes and a lot of things that were introduced and then not really explored. I just feel like isn't really wrapped up or addressed or explained at like any length at all. So I was left pretty confused on a couple points and not really sure what's going on. But I think that if and when I read Who Fears Death, this book will make a lot more sense. So tentatively, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I am definitely willing to revisit that rating after I read Who Fears Death, because maybe this is just a book that you can't read in any order, and you're supposed to read Who Fears Death first. But anyway, this is about a woman named Phoenix. There are these towers in America and other places in the West that kidnap people in Africa and study them and try and turn them into these accelerated biological organisms. There's a lot of rich insight on scientific racism and the manipulation of black bodies across history, and a lot of commentary about that, which I thought was really well done. If you like sci-fi or apocalyptic kind of stories, or if you like books that take place across a variety of continents. It starts out in America, and then she goes to Africa, and then she comes back to America, and then she eventually goes to the Virgin Islands. So there's a lot of travel. So if you like travel literature, I think this is really, it was a really interesting book, and I want to read more Okafor. I just think that perhaps this wasn't where I was intended to start. Next, I read Blood and Guts in High School by Kathy Acker for my postmodernism class. This was incredibly, incredibly hard to read. There are so many content warnings. I would just look them up because this is a very, very violent and sexually graphic novel about incest and sexual abuse and pedophilia, and it is just really difficult to read. So why did we read it? This is a work of post-punk feminism. I had to read it for class, but otherwise I probably wouldn't have picked it up. We're in the home stretch. Next, I listened to Actor Age Eve Brown, which actually came out in March. We're on to the March books right now. Did I tell you that we're into the March books? I'm sorry. But I read Actor Age Eve Brown, which is the third book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. Again, I gave all of them a 5 out of 5 stars because they were delightful and amazing. This one follows Eve Brown and her male love interest Jacob, whose last name I cannot remember. Super steamy, super sweet, really cute. Lots of food, because Jacob, the male love interest, owns a bed and breakfast, and Eve, who has recently been kind of scolded by her parents for not being able to hold down a job, decides to apply to be the chef at the bed and breakfast, and then she accidentally hits Jacob with his car after they kind of get off on the wrong foot, and she ends up kind of accidentally getting the position because they are really in dire need of somebody, and she has just hit the owner with the car, and it's just a really, really cute, clunky, whimsical little like romance, and I just absolutely loved it. It's very atmospheric because it takes place at a bed and breakfast. Also, one thing that I love is that both Eve and Jacob are on the autism spectrum, and there is really, really wonderful representation for neurodivergent individuals and how, even though they're both on the autism spectrum, they have such different experiences of their environment and have such different experiences of gaining comfortability in their environment. So that was really cool. It's kind of like an enemies to friends to lovers romance, so if you're into that, you should definitely check it out. If you like the other Brown Sisters trilogies, if you like romance, I mean, I'm just a broken record at this point, but I really, really highly recommend this series. I mean, if a fantasy girl like me can love and appreciate this trilogy, then I think anybody can. After that, I had a void in my heart. I was really, really just so sad to be done with the Brown Sisters trilogy. And so I decided to listen to The Kiss Quotient, which is another really, really beloved romance series on BookTube that I've seen so many people read. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. It was really, really sweet, super cute, very, very steamy. Absolutely so steamy, and it definitely passed my emotional and physical reaction test where it gave me butterflies and pulled at my heartstrings literally and emotionally. It is about the 30-something career-driven Stella Lane who has Asperger's, and because of her previous romantic experiences, she thinks that she doesn't have like experience in like the sexual realm. She's like kind of doubtful of her abilities and thinks that because other men haven't understood her needs or have just in general not treated her well or performed well, that she somehow she kind of thinks that she's less than. So she hires a male escort. Even though this book was really, really sweet and really, really cute, and I loved reading another neurodivergent protagonist in a romance, I have 2 problems with it. The reason that it didn't get a higher rating is first because the name of the male love interest for personal reasons that I'm not going to disclose, was very, very cringy for me. So because I was listening to it as an audiobook, especially just hearing his name come up over and over again, I was just like, oh, stop. So yeah, that was really cringy. And the second thing is his personal, like, his self-doubt and his issue with himself and his belief that he, like, isn't good enough for Stella. To me, I just, like, I wasn't really buying it, like, and it's very repetitive, and I just wasn't really understanding where his belief was founded. Basically, like, because his father was a con artist and a womanizer, he thinks that he can't have love and can't find love, and, like, I understand that to a degree, but I just, like, something about that storyline just wasn't really sitting right with me, especially based on all of the other things that he says to Stella and to his friends and the actions that he, like, takes. It's just, I wasn't really buying it, so yeah. The next book is actually a graphic novel, and that is Wonder Woman Volume 3, The Truth by Greg Rucka. This series is stunning. Greg Rucka is a genius. I wish that the movies were based on the stuff that he writes because it's so wonderful. It's an amazing reimagining adaptation. I have been really, really loving this series. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really liked it. There were a couple things that I was just like confused about, or I was like, what's going on? But for the most part, I really loved it. Again, the art style is so good. I love the art. I live and breathe for the art style and for this imagining of Wonder Woman. Okay, real quick, next, the very last novel that I read for my postmodernism class is White Noise by Dawn DeLillo. And let me just say, skip it. It's a pass. Do not read it. It's boring. It's long. It's not that interesting. It's about white middle class consumerism and this dude who has a midlife crisis and is worried about when he's gonna die. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, so lame. Finally, the last book that I read for my senior seminar course is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This book is really, really good. Oh my god, did I love it. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It is a post-apocalypse zombie novel, and it's about sentient zombies, basically, or like the possibility of sentient zombies. They're not all sentient. I'm not gonna say too much because I really feel like going into this having no clue what's going on is the best way to read it, but it was really, really thrilling and creepy and gory, and it's so really amazing. There's a lot of insight into humanity and what it means to be human, which is why we're reading it for my post-humanism class, and how the zombies push the boundary on what we deem human and who we deem human. If you want something cool to read, if you like zombie fiction, post-apocalypse stuff, it's just a really, really great book. Okay, that is the wrap-up. That's all my notes. We're done with the wrap-up. That's 28 books that I read over the winter months. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really appreciate you stopping by and coming to spend some time with me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if that's your jam, and I'll see you in my next video. Happy reading, happy writing, and happy living. Bye!